opposite to the West, which makes one right and the other always wrong. Depends on how you see yourself. Depends on who you see yourself. Depends on where you position yourself.
When he was dying, he was very, very adamant that we continue to do what we do, meaning like my generation of Arab Americans, to tell our story. And I think that that's the most direct connection I can make between what I do and what he did, or what he started. And the idea of Orientalism, and don't let them tell us who we are. You have to step in and tell your story, and to see your story in the context of other stories. To me, he will always be my dad. He will never be Edward Said.
In the end, that's what I am. I'm a teacher. I don't think of myself as a writer, although I've written, many books, and God knows probably too many of them. But the idea of teaching is really something that is deeply important to me as a kind of exploring together. As a Palestinian intellectual, it would seem to me that one of the things that are terribly important is for the Palestinian intellectual to keep the question of Palestine alive, which means going against prevailing policy not only in America and Europe, but even in the Arab world and even in Palestine. You see, because there's a consensus around certain views that need to be challenged. Where, in other words, the role of that intellectual is to ask questions, to disturb people, to stir up reflection, to provoke, you might say, controversy and thought.
I only disappointed him once during my academic career, when I signed up for an English class on postmodernism, a class whose required texts included, among other atrocities, Batman comic books. Oh, how Daddy was outraged. No daughter of mine is going to Princeton to read comic books. My daughter reads Shakespeare and Virgil. That class is a waste of time. It's utter rubbish. I think he even threatened not to pay my tuition. Daddy, you are so old. The reason that class has comic books is because it's a class on postmodernism. You don't even know what that is. Know what it is, Najla? I invented the field. He treated everyone equally and had an endearing childlike curiosity about everyone's background. His eyes would sparkle and light up whenever someone new walked in a room. It was almost as if you could see their light shining in his eyes. He could absolutely bring a light out of anyone. I miss him. But it's cool. That movie really captured me. He looks really sick in it too, because when you contrast the Columbia one where he doesn't have the beard and the other one, it was like, whoa.
And I remember in the Columbia one, he was already looking sick in that one compared to before he was sick.
Here the lovely girl is. I wanted to say, well, you see how beautifully you painted the soul and times that you two shared.
Thank you.
It was brilliant.
Thank you.
And
you were wonderful too. Did you even write anything down?
Oh, I'd written quite a lot down, but then
I can't do that.
I hadn't memorized it, but it's kind of in me anyway since it came out of me onto the page.
Oh, that's true. Sorry, this is my friend Molly.
Great to meet you, Molly.
Nice to meet you.
I never grew up in a world where Orientalism wasn't a concept, and I didn't discover it, right? So it was like always there. It was always taught to me. I was always taught to read, I read, in my French class in like 10th or 11th grade, we read The Stranger, the Camus novel. And I was like, this book is so racist against Arabs. And I read the whole thing, and we acted out the trial, and I was like, I want to be the Arab. And it was all in French, of course, which was very funny. But I was like, I hate this book, and that's all I wrote about. And it's not like I learned that from my dad. It was just imbued in me in some other way as I was growing up. It's just like osmosis. I think that's what's so great about having a theater company, because theater is basically storytelling. And we have a group of Arab Americans, and it's a very different generation. You know, we're all children of Arabs who grew up in America. Right after he passed away, I had to go and do this theater project that I had been committed to for a long time, which was called Reorientalism, which was inspired by his book.
This olive is Beiruti and split in two decades ago. Now it is trying to cleave itself back together.
I am an activist in a lot of ways, but I don't go speak at rallies and I don't give talk. I'm not sort of him. You know, people ask me to do things that I would not do. It's one thing to be celebrated and interviewed and, you know, sought out because of your ideas or your work, but it's another thing to have to, because I'm not him, and I didn't write his books, and I haven't read all of them either, and I don't know that I agree with everything he says. I'm sure I do, but I am not him.
And then someday.
I am not an expert on terrorism.
Terrorist is often viewed as a fanatic.
I'm a poet.
Especially in action with Lee. Self-destruction.
A writer, a political creature, a feminist.
Surely by the Quran, unbelievers are Hezbollah sees itself as the savior.
My expertise
How many generations have we destroyed?
is experience.
My father once said to me that, in a sort of wistful way, that it was probably better that we take on the cause, you know, of Palestine or, you know, whatever, because I think he had a feeling that his generation, and, you know, Arafat, Sharon, him, all these people who were present in '48, who had lived in Palestine, had a connection to the experience, were too attached and couldn't, in a way, give up a certain hold on the land or on their homes, and that for us, being this sort of second generation, and especially like the kids there, you know, they've all grown up together, and so perhaps we're a little bit removed, and we will be able to somehow create a viable sort of living option.
I'm very interested in the idea, actually I was thinking about that, of oppression and anti-Semitism and whose oppression we honor and whose we disregard and why. And here versus other places in the world, and what are the ways that happens?
That's a great one.
I mean,
when we talked about the difference between the first Intifada and the second, and the stuff when it became this beautiful act of throwing stones against a tank and having people actually see and be sympathetic toward Palestine, and then when it just morphed into, I'm going to blow myself up. He would have these outbursts of telling us that we had to sort of like continue. He cried for Palestine. It was really quite sweet. He couldn't speak very well. He didn't know words. He didn't know the words for things. At some point, he was holding, I forget what it was, like a pair of underwear or something. He was calling it a blanket, and then vice versa with the blanket, you know, and it was horrifying to see someone who had so much knowledge and such careful usage of words and such an incredible vocabulary and eloquence, not know what words were. And he knew it, and it was really hard. So I think we're similar, but I'm sort of letting the, like, Edward Said's daughter kind of go a little bit and just doing what I do and having other people say, oh, you're very much like your father in what you do in your own way. So it's not like I'm writing like Orientalism 2, the sequel, or whatever. That would be awful.